So, uh, let me start off by saying this one's a little bit of an explainer of a process that I've been working on um, for processing changes, and I'm all about efficiency and optimization, and I think I'm onto something with this one. I haven't really seen it explained this way in other places. I mean, maybe it has been. But yeah, and there's a certain reason why I'm approaching it this way. But uh, so this is going to be the background explainer, and then I'll give kind of an example when when I get to um, when I get to the second video. So the first thing is, I learned uh, staff and reading fairly young. Um, so theory comes fairly naturally to me. The second thing is, but I still work at it. Second thing is, improv wise, I really didn't start improvising more regularly until I started playing guitar, and um, and after learning the fretboard. Um, Excuse me. And the third thing is, I'm definitely more of a pattern guy than anything. So why I say that is because there's plenty of schools of thought out there around improvising and whatnot, and excuse me. Sometimes folks will say it's not really a puzzle to be solved per se. Like there's this language component, but again, I hear that, but I'm a pattern guy. I do think of it as kind of a pattern to be solved, and or as a problem to be solved, and it's these different approaches to solving it that really sort of drives me to find out different ways of doing things. And you'll understand why I mention the guitar when I talk about sort of something interesting that I found later on. So one thing is, understanding. Now, some of this stuff, there's going to be a simple, when I get into the example, in the second video, it'll be a little bit clearer as to sort of what the simplified approach could be. But the first thing is understanding scale degrees and chords. So it's really important so that you can recognize how the thirds and sevenths transition between each other, to get to understand how they relate with each other when I ultimately get to what I do. Second thing is really about I'd say root movement. Root movement, and I'll say root movement and chord quality. And this is where, like, the various exercises in hearing how these chords are formed and how the scale relates to that chord is pretty important. So I've done a lot of work on, playing one chord vamps over minor, dominant, major, whatever. The third, sorry, is really starting to understand some of the theory in jazz harmony, and even the concept of avoid notes or whatever, but really sort of juicy notes and extension, understanding the role of extensions in that harmony and whatnot. But so for this, my first method is it's the 13th, 7th, 2nd, and 3rd, and that can be written as 6, 7, 2, 3. And this is looking at, essentially the 6, 7, 2, and 3 degrees of the chord relative to the root. And it's going to change, right? So in a minor, it's going to be a 6 flat 7 2 flat 3, and in a dominant, it's going to be a 6 flat 7 2 3, right? But these change relative to your root. So the example of a 2-5-1 is in C is D minor 7, G7, C7. Well, your 7 on the D minor 7 is an F. And your 7 on the C is a B. It's a major 7. So what gets confusing for me is how these relationships change with each of the chords. And sometimes these can move by really fast. So I wanted to figure out a way to, simplify this a little bit. But what I think is important is trying to hit those notes. And what I did find is that, I would almost call these sort of safe or home base, but only so far as to train the ear to be able to start picking up on various interval jumps. And that's kind of where my pattern-oriented brain shifts from these numbers and degrees to hearing like really neat harmonies that I didn't think I'd be hearing. I'm generally a melody guy, despite also being a pattern guy, but this method has opened up a lot new melodic possibilities for me, which I find quite interesting. The other thing that's interesting is that there's a lot of space between the second between the 3rd and 7th. And what's really hard, because I come from a background in, like I said, it's a background in reading. Well, if you're poking a D, G, C out, and then you're trying to highlight your, 3rds and 7ths, whatever that may be. What gets tough is there's a lot of space. And in fact, like if you wanted to jump from your F up to your B, you've got to start populating those notes, right? And you can do that, but visually, like from a pattern perspective, again, I have a lot of trouble visualizing that. And like I said, one thing I didn't mention is that, when I played guitar, I had been playing trumpet for years, and I started picking up guitar, and I became a really good improviser because it was all based on patterns. And so I could look at the fretboard and figure out, jumps and targets or whatever, and then use my ear to kind of resolve or whatever. And that's pretty hard to do with the trumpet unless you're staring at, sheet music or whatever. Anyway, so this, is fine still, and I was using voice leading and stuff to sort of understand what was going on, going from here to here to here. But it really limits their harmonic possibilities, in my opinion. And you've got to kind of map out, every little thing that you were doing. Otherwise, you risk hitting an avoid note or whatever. What's interesting about using this approach is instead you're linking in a linear fashion all of the notes that are conducive to the harmony of that chord. So if you rewrite this again in, let me go a little bit further down. You rewrite this again, but instead, the other thing is there's vertical and there's horizontal harmony. Vertical and horizontal harmony, vertical and horizontal lines, and blah, blah, blah. And I've tried to force myself into thinking diagonally, which is really funny to say out loud again, but I've tried to combine them. I find when I only think vertically, I'm like, and this is kind of in terms of the ending result of improvisation. Like, I think it's still really important. You think vertically and horizontally in practicing to try and understand what's going on in both directions. But in terms of improv, I do try to think horizontally, which is a combination. So why I say that is because, now I'll write the D out up here. So the root notes again, here, you got D minor 7, G7, and then C major 7. So instead of having these gaps like that, this one's not as bad. When you use this approach that I've talked about up here, this 6-7-2-3, you're connecting the root note diagonally from one to the other. So you're here 6, 7, 2, 3. Here you're 3, 2, 6, 7, and here you're 6, 7, 2, 3. And you see what happens, right? Like, if you can embed the root note pattern, you don't necessarily have to remember what the sevenths and thirds are. You'll hit them sometimes, and sometimes you'll hit a 6 or whatever, and that's probably okay. I think, like, over time, you get more awareness through practicing on purpose, right? Like, you want to hit a third as a resolved note, you want to hit a 7 as a resolved note. But with this method, when I'm mid-phrase and I hear a juicy note, I'm starting to recognize kind of where it's at relative to the root and kind of shift back to another thing, right? And working on these chords in isolation and really trying to get a sense in all the different chord qualities before combining them, I think is extremely important. And I demonstrated that in a different video. But this used the 6-7-2-3 method is what I'm calling it. And yeah, they're really just the notes closest to the root without actually playing the root. Yeah. And then I took it a step further because I do want to play fast. And I'm always trying to challenge so again, on this led to some extremely melodic improvisation that I didn't feel so limited by how I felt that the voice leading should be, or at least how I've been trained, or whatever you want to call it. So this allowed me to find my way through there's a lot of combinations, right? 4, 4, and 4. 4 times 4 times 4 is the, effectively the combinations that you can do with those notes, right? Like it's a lot. Yeah. Uh, and I think you'd probably find the same thing when you focus on the 6, 7, 2, and 3 over one chord vamp on a G7. I think you'll notice that a bunch of those notes, those 4 notes, they all sound good. When you either start a phrase or end a phrase on them. Okay, so what I did then, and I didn't know this would happen, but it ended up happening. So I mentioned how these degrees, they're relative to the current chord you're on, right? So this is a C. And let me clean this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. One thing that I was doing was writing out the scale degree of that chord. So here you have a B, which is a 6, or you call it a 13th. Here you have a flat 7 because it's D minor, and here you have a 9 or a 2. So I would be doing those for various phrases, and then I would be able to transpose them more readily when I was doing some theory work. But it really, now it's like second nature, right? So I know when I'm gonna go hit the third of a D, it's gonna be an F natural of a D minor 7. So I still need to get better, but it's progressing. But a seventh or a flat 7 here is not the same as a seventh or a flat 7 on G7. And so, here instead it's an F natural, right? Which is also a flat 7. But so now we're saying a flat 7 in this chord is a C, and a flat 7 in this chord is an F natural. I'm like, okay, but pattern-wise, they're both flat 7s, and it might be half a second and they change. So again, relative to the root, important, not questioning that, but in terms of overall simplicity and flexibility and relax of being able to improv properly. I haven't been really that fond of how the degrees change between chords. So that was one. So degrees change between chords. The second thing was I actually started writing, and I guess I'll show you an example here. Where is Jazz Standards? I love you. And I was doing, and I'm not going to get too far into this. It's pretty involved, but I was having trouble memorizing chord changes, and instead of moving to a new tonic key, I was actually indicating the Roman numeral relative. Sorry, changing to a new key. I was actually indicating the Roman numeral relative to the main tonic. So the example is if you're playing a 2-5-1 D G C, and then you move to a C minor. Be a D minor 7, G7, C major 7, and then you move to a C minor 7, F 7, B flat. Well, I mean, at first you would write 2-5-1, and here you go 2-5-1. I said no, I'm going to make them relative to the tonic key, so I would go 2-5-1. And I would say 1 minor. So I would make sure I kept it relative to the major key. Here, instead of being a 5, it'd be a 4, but it'd be a 7. And then B flat, I'd have it as a flat 7, but as a major. So that allowed me to have some sense of relative to. I then started being able to group changes together more, which I think helped me transpose more quickly when I've been transposing these forms or whatever. But anyway, I wanted to find a similar approach for this method here. And I started thinking about it. And then I wrote I wrote it almost like a fretboard, but I wrote the vertical harmony out horizontally, if that kind of makes sense, right? So here, if we just call these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we restart. 7, 6, 5, or whatever. Okay, so with the tonic being C major, 1 is equal to C major, or C. So that's here. Let me do this a little bit differently again. Just want to make sure I have enough room. So we're actually going to start at 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're going to do the same thing. 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so the first chord is C major. First chord is D minor 7. Second chord is G7. Third chord is C major 7. Okay, now I'm writing it out that way because the chord progression, I'm not writing it that way. I'm writing it down that way. And you'll see why in a minute. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight in white the root movement. So the root movement is the 2. And again, this is all relative to C major. So even though the root is 1 when you're on D minor, because this is all relative to C major, it's 2. Okay? Then we go 2, 5, 1. Then I write out my, in sort of green, I wrote out my, what I would say up here is my 6, 7, 2, 3. So you go 6, 7, 2, 3, you go 6, 7, 2, 3, and you go 6, 7, 2, 3. Okay? And we're going to do it again. We're just going to do the 5 here, and we're going to write out the 6, 7. And what do you notice? You notice that the 3s form this group, and the 7s form this group. And keep in mind, these are all relative to the major key. So my theory started to evolve and said, well, you could just actually hang on the 7 on the entire entire progression, and it would sound okay. And it does. And that's true for the 7, it's true for the 3. And one interesting thing here is if you populate the 6, use a slightly different color. No, it's not going to work. If you also populate the 6 as a 5, and you put it down here, you actually notice that you can hang on the 6. Whoops, wrong color. You actually notice that the 6s form another group. And that was really, I mean, to me, it was really something. And the same thing with the 2s. because the 2 is the 5 of 5. Now, it's all going to sound really funny, but this is it. If you play the 6, 7, the 2, or the 3 of your tonic at any chord, it will sound okay. And that's the realization. That's it. Everything else is just, it's important. But if you, and what I'll show you in the example, is if you play the 6 through all 3 chords, and you really let it sink in the feeling of that 6, and then you do the same for the 7 as the chords pass by, and then you do the same for the 2, and then you do the same for the 3. I found running this exercise a few times, it gave me so much more appreciation for the tonality of how things shift within the chord changes themselves. And yeah, like, is it an appropriate voice lead to go 6, 6, 6? Yeah, absolutely. So it gives you 4 immediate lines to play over top of a 2-5-1 that sound okay. And now you'll do that. I was doing it for 20 minutes or whatever, and I go, okay, let me try something different. And then I would just start choosing notes. So, okay, that's one. Now, what does this look like? It looks like a guitar fretboard. And I don't know. I'm going to be working on this even more, but building patterns from here, it speaks more to me than even some of this note stuff, right? Or the vocal expression, because I, learned how to play guitar. Like, I learned all my modes, and those are the things that speak to me. So jumping around from like a 4 to a 3 to a 2 or whatever, those all speak to me. And then understanding how these chords shift, but relative to their tonic key degree, also important, because I found that's the thing that connects to me. I don't know why, but hearing a D minor chord relative to a 2-5 in C, and thinking a 2 as a root versus a 1 as a root, well, it just, I don't know, it didn't really resonate with me, and that's kind of the way that I picked up scale degrees at first. But anyway, but you kind of need both to understand what's going on with this diagram. So what does that mean? Well, in a 2-5-1, you can play a D as the 2 of the 1. You can play an E as the 3 of the 1. You can play an A as the 6, and you can play a B as the 7. And you can literally mix mash any of those options without even thinking about it. And you can just go, D, E, A. It would sound fine. You could go B, A, B. It would sound fine. You could go A, D, E. That would sound fine. And that's like, I don't know if you're giddy like I do, get giddy over this stuff like I do, but that was such a tremendous realization, because when you're fluttering about at like 150 beats per minute, sometimes there's a bit of a hesitancy to go, let loose fully, worried that you're not going to be able to find your way back or whatever. But understanding that all those notes are really good anchor notes for whatever you're trying to achieve, very important. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I got to. So, that's how I developed this approach. Now, what is my actual approach for, running through a set of changes? So, here's my method that I did, and this is how I transposed into one of my more difficult keys recently. And because I'm starting to refine my process, and hone in on the things that work for me. What did it mean? Well, I wrote because I'm pattern and I'm theory first-ish. I write it out first. So I write out the root movement and chord quality. I wrote out the chord tonal shifts and the 6-7-2-3, and then I write out 6-7-2-3 of every chord. Now you don't have to do that, but it's just me understanding more and more about what's going on. And so what did I do? So the last one I did was here. Now I tried it a couple of different ways, but anyway, this is, if you look at just this side first, this is the A section, and then over here is the B. Don't ask me why I did it this way. I have no idea. But anyway, you see that I wrote out the 2-5-1. It's got the half diminished 7 altered, and whatever. Yeah, so I write out the chord quality and root movement. I try to understand just on a basic 2-5-1 where those juicy notes are, the 6-7-2-3. I even wrote the 6-7-2-3 in this method, and this was before I came up with a different method. It's questionable whether or not this is even helpful, but I suppose. Yeah, and I evolved from. I used to be writing guide tones, but I'm not there yet. I wanted to be able to. Another important thing is I wanted to be able to create guide tones on the spot, and I want them to sound good. So I'm trying to progress towards that. Okay, so that's the first thing, and it looks like a lot, but it once you get good at it, it doesn't take that long. It's worthwhile, I think. Then I practice. So again, like I've done a lot of scales and stuff. So this is kind of like, this is more, I don't want to say advanced, but it's more time consuming to approach it this way. But I definitely play the root movements. I then play the 9th chord scales. And there's a chord scale exercise that I've talked about in the past. And then I find the 6-7-2-3 in order to map what I call the home bases. And then taking a step further is, so I do the 6-7-2-3 of each chord, and then I map the 6-7-2-3 of the tonic, just to make sure those are the notes that I want to try to hit. Then I start improvising. So once I do that, one of the things is that because improvising, there's a lot of stuff to improvising that has nothing to do with scales. It's like building phrases when you come in, resolving properly or whatever, feeling different things, syncopation, rhythmic patterns or whatever. And because there's so many different things to do and so many different techniques, I just choose one. Now I'm just choosing one per new key, or it might be a new one every couple of days, right? And I've got a book. You can Google it. The folks here at Learn Jazz Standards, the leaders here, they talk about a lot of really neat improvisation techniques. How to make yourself sing through the instrument. And I don't make it too complicated. I just pick one. And the first thing is, if I'm feeling uncomfortable on one particular chord, like I played now a lot on these half diminished chords, and I'm starting to understand them. I've played a lot on the altered chords. I'm starting to understand them more. One thing I haven't done is the major 7 sharp 4, and it's an important chord on Black Narcissus. But the point is, like, if I were going to, if I were looking at a set of chord changes and there's a chord that I don't play a lot on, I would spend time. I spend like 20 minutes just playing over top of that one chord, understand how and hear how different degrees connect to that root. And even though it's only been playing for 4 beats sometimes, being able to stay on it for a long time really, really gives you the sense of that, that chord function. And I think that's really important. And it's okay. If you want to apply one improvisation concept to one chord, you can do that. No reason why you can't. So then what I do is I look at the core. If I were going to do one chord, that's how I would approach it. But most of the song "I Love You," I'm pretty good on all the chord qualities. So I skip to doing chord passages, and then again, it's about finding the ones that you have the most difficulty with, or just reviewing them all. So in "I Love You," there's really three. Well, I guess four if you include the half diminished alt 5, and then it goes back to the minor 7/5. And then there's another one where you have a key shift, and then there's another one where you have another key shift. But the point is that you isolate those and play over top of those until you're comfortable. And then once you're comfortable on that, I shift into the A section. Then once I'm comfortable on that, I'll shift into the entire B section, and I'll record that. And then I'll do the full form. And this might be over the course of 3 or 4 days, where you're doing just one chord, the chords that you're not quite sure of, then you're isolating the chord passages, then you're putting them all together in the A section, then you might do the B section on that same day or whatever, and then you do the full form the next day. It's okay to either use the same improvisation concept or to move on. And so one of the ones that I'm getting a lot of mileage out of right now is I'm trying to play higher. So I'm trying to use the concept of arc, which is storytelling. And I try to just let that be my focal point for some of my improv exercises or some of my improv recordings or whatever. The other one that I'm getting a lot of mileage out of is space. So I'm like doing 4 bars of nothing, and then 4, and then the other one is it's called resisting the urge to come in, I guess you would say. So those are the 3 that I'm working with right now, and I kind of alternate between them whenever I'm sitting down for improv. Yeah, so that would be again. It's the broader process of really processing the changes to the point where I'm sort of ready to do a final take, right? And I know it looks like a lot, but a lot of this can be baked into standard routines, like especially these, right? So instead of me pulling out like an Arbin's book or how to play trumpet or whatever, I'm just going and I'm playing root movements. I'm doing, like this is the example, right? Like this is where it gets sort of something that the Learn Jazz Standards guys say all the time is like just start applying your practice sessions over top of changes. Well, I might want to be working on endurance, and I decide that long tones are going to be super important. Well, just play the long tones, but play it in the root movement of a song. You know what I mean? Like just do that. Or I want to learn some more flexibility and I want to do lip slurs. Well, fine, do lip slurs, but do it like in the 7th and 9th chords of the chord quality movement of the song. You know what I mean? I want to work on digital patterns. Well, work on digital patterns, but use 7, 2, and 3, and 6 to form a digital pattern, and then take it through chromatics or whatever. Like, so yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean that's kind of it in a nutshell. I guess we can. My next video will be as an example of just the simple thing. I think just to close out, that was everything. The most important takeaway that I want is that if you're playing a 2-5-1 in C major, try hanging on the D for all chords. Then try hanging on the E for all chords. Try hanging on the A for all chords. Try hanging on the B for all chords. Not only will you have your first 4 voice leadings as a basis, you'll have really drilled home that you can hit any of those notes on any of those chords. It will sound okay. And it's just a process of getting into and getting out of. And for me, when I'm playing super, super fast, I don't have to think, oh, I need to, resolve this 6 to the 7 and voice lead this D to the C sharp or whatever. No, I just think I'm just going to flutter about until I land on one of those notes. And I'm going to trust my ear and my listening to make it sound like music. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's that video.